They were screaming. I don't even remember how I got to the backyard, whether I walked or ran, but the moment I saw the empty fire barrel, my body locked up. Smoke still hung in the air like a ghost, curling toward the bruised sky. And standing there, with smug expressions and eyes too calm, were the three people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. My mother, my father, and my sister, Daisy. She was laughing. She actually had the nerve to laugh as she scrolled on her phone, her glitter-painted nails flashing in the dying light. Her camera was angled just so, capturing some twisted celebration. "Selfishness will disappear," she said to the lens. The smugness in her voice sent shivers down my spine. But the joke was on them. They thought they had power. They thought they were stealing my future. They thought they had my $12.7 million lottery check. But what they didn't know, what they never knew, was that the real check, the one with my name in crisp ink and numbers that still made me dizzy to think about, was locked away in a vault across town. What they took was a photocopy, a decoy, a test. And they failed. Miserably. But let me take you back. Let me tell you how we got to this moment. My name is Lila Rosewood, and for most of my life, I was nothing more than a shadow in my own home. The invisible daughter. The one who did the chores, got the grades, stayed out of trouble. The one who never asked for anything. While Daisy, beautiful, loud, and reckless, was the son the entire family revolved around. I remember being 10 years old, working on a diorama for school. I stayed up late building it. I used toothpicks and paint and every ounce of patience I had. I was so proud. Until Daisy tripped over it on purpose, giggling as the whole thing shattered. When I cried, my mother told me not to be so sensitive. "It's just a project, Lila." Daisy didn't mean it. But she did. And they always let her. Through high school, it was the same. I worked nights at a grocery store to afford my own clothes. Daisy got a credit card with no limit and crashed 2 cars before she turned 18. She never got grounded. I once got a C in math and was banned from my phone for a month. I studied harder. Daisy partied harder. They said she was going through things. They said she was fragile. They said I was strong enough to carry it all. So I did. I carried the guilt. The weight. The silence. I smiled through it. Until I couldn't anymore. After I graduated college on a full scholarship, no less, I came home, thinking maybe, just maybe, they'd be proud. But they barely looked up from the TV. My dad asked me if I was applying for real jobs. My mother wanted me to help around the house until Daisy found her footing. Again. I didn't stay long. I moved into a tiny apartment with peeling wallpaper and a leaky faucet. I juggled 2 jobs. Teaching music lessons by day and cleaning a yoga studio by night. It was exhausting. Lonely. But it was mine. Then came the night everything changed. It was raining hard, the kind of cold rain that soaks through your shoes and makes your bones ache. I just finished a long shift, and I was broke. Not metaphorically broke. I had $12.41 in my bank account. I ducked into a gas station for shelter, just for a moment. That's when I saw the sign. Flashing neon. Lottery jackpot. $12.7 million. Something in me snapped. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was hope. But I bought a ticket. Just one. I didn't think about it again until 5 days later, when I saw the winning numbers on the news while folding laundry in the laundromat. My heart stopped. I pulled the ticket out of my wallet. One number matched. Then another. Then all of them. I couldn't breathe. I stared at the ticket for so long a stranger had to ask if I was okay. I nodded. I wasn't. I had just become a millionaire. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I went outside and sat on a bench and stared at the gray sky, letting the reality sink in. My life was about to change forever. And then, stupidly, I told them. I called my mom. I don't even know why. Maybe because some broken part of me still believed that, deep down, they cared. I said the words as softly as I could, like maybe if I whispered it, they wouldn't ruin it. I won. I actually won the lottery. $12.7 million. Silence. Then my mom said, "Well, what's Daisy's share?" No congratulations. No joy. Just expectation. I told her there wasn't a share, that I'd already spoken to a lawyer, that it was mine. By dinner, the entire family knew. They called a meeting like it was some kind of intervention. Daisy came in wearing one of my old sweaters, the one she borrowed 2 years ago and never returned. She plopped onto the couch like royalty. My dad asked if I was serious about not sharing. I said yes. That's when Daisy said something that changed everything. Then you don't deserve it. They were quiet after that. Too quiet. And the next morning, my mailbox was broken open. Inside had been a decoy envelope with a printed copy of the check, one I kept for reference. Nothing important. But it was gone. I knew. I knew they'd taken it. They didn't think it was a copy. They thought it was the real thing. And the moment I saw Daisy's post, holding the envelope triumphantly in a video, smirking into the camera with the caption, "Some things don't belong to the selfish," I knew exactly what they were trying to do. Erase my victory. But all they really did was prove what I had suspected my whole life. They didn't love me. They loved what I could give them. But now, I had something no one could take from me anymore. And I was going to make sure they regretted ever thinking they could. The morning after the video surfaced, I woke up with a pit in my stomach. Not fear. Not even sadness. It was something heavier, like dread wrapped in a layer of fury. The kind of fury that comes from knowing you're not just fighting to keep what's yours, but proving you were never theirs to manipulate in the first place. The air was cold. My apartment was silent, save for the groaning radiator and the occasional footsteps from the neighbor upstairs. I made coffee, black, bitter, and sat in the kitchen with the mug between my palms like it might anchor me. My phone buzzed, again and again, notifications pinging as the video spread. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years were texting me links. A few acquaintances from high school sent emojis or vague messages pretending to check in, but I could feel the curiosity behind every word. My family had taken it public. Not just the theft, not just the lie, they had turned my story into theirs. They made me the villain. And yet, I still hadn't gone to the police. Why? Because somewhere deep inside me, I wanted to believe this could still be salvaged. That maybe my mother would call and apologize, even if it was weak. That Daisy might cry real tears instead of the rehearsed kind she was so good at. That my father would sit across from me and just see me. But that didn't happen. Instead, I got a voicemail from Daisy's number. "Hey Lila, listen. I know you're probably upset, but Mom said maybe we could all just talk this out, you know? Like family. We didn't mean to upset you. We were just confused. And scared. Money changes people. Anyway, we're having dinner tomorrow night. You should come. We'll fix this. Promise." She didn't sound remorseful. She sounded like someone trying to clear her own name. Like she knew the storm was coming and wanted to be on high ground. Still, I went. I didn't tell them I was coming. I just drove. The road was slick with melted frost, the sky painted in dull gray. Their house loomed at the end of the cul-de-sac like a stage set, too perfect, too clean. I parked at the curb, stepped out, and walked up the path slowly, each footstep deliberate. They were waiting inside. The lights were too bright. The dining table was set, not just for dinner, but like a peace offering. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, the works. My dad stood at the kitchen counter, carving the meat like it was Thanksgiving. My mother was at the sink, pretending not to notice me, while Daisy lounged at the table, phone in hand, fake smiling before I even sat down. "Lila," my mom said, voice syrupy. "You came. That's good. Let's just talk." I didn't sit. I stood at the head of the table and crossed my arms. "Where is it?" Daisy blinked. "What?" "The envelope you took from my mailbox. The one you filmed yourself waving around like it was a trophy. Where is it now?" My father turned, knife still in his hand. "We were going to give it back. We just wanted to talk first." I narrowed my eyes. "So you admit you took it?" Judith, my mother, sighed, loud and theatrical. "Lila, we didn't steal anything. That envelope didn't even have your name on it. It could have been anyone's." I laughed, sharp and humorless. "You think if you play stupid long enough, this will just go away? You broke into federal mail. That's a felony." Daisy's eyes widened. "God, Lila, relax. It was a mistake. We thought you'd just be reasonable. By taking what wasn't yours. By reminding you that family comes first, Judith snapped. The room fell silent. And then my father said the quiet part out loud. We did it because we knew you wouldn't share. There it was. The admission. The entitlement. The raw, ugly truth. I took a slow breath and looked at each of them in turn. You didn't just take a piece of paper, I said. You made a choice. You decided that your greed was worth more than my trust. You tried to erase what I earned, what I suffered for, because you couldn't control it. Daisy scoffed. You're being dramatic. No, I said. I'm being honest. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out a document, and slid it across the table. A notice from my attorney. A warning letter. From now on, any contact regarding the lottery goes through my lawyer. You want to talk about family? Do it in court. My mother's face went pale. My dad finally put down the knife. Daisy started to speak, then closed her mouth. For once. I turned, walked toward the door, and didn't look back. But as I stepped outside into the cold air, I saw movement at the window. Daisy, standing there, phone to her ear. She was calling someone. And in that moment, I realized something important. They weren't done. They were just getting started. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I laid on the couch in the soft flicker of a dying lamp bulb, listening to the distant hum of the city beyond my window, the occasional honk, the rhythm of a world still turning while mine felt like it had tilted sideways. My mind wouldn't shut off. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daisy's face behind that window, whispering into her phone. Planning. Always planning. By the time the first sliver of morning light cracked across the skyline, I had already brewed a second pot of coffee. Unopened legal folders fanned out on the kitchen table like tarot cards waiting to be read. I didn't need caffeine. I needed clarity. I needed strategy. Because one thing was suddenly very clear to me, they weren't giving up. They had tried to guilt me, then steal from me, then spin the story like I was the one who had betrayed them. And now they were working behind the scenes again, probably trying to pull strings I didn't even know they had. That kind of desperation wasn't born from disappointment. It was born from entitlement, the unshakable belief that everything I had should have belonged to them. I needed help. I called Mr. Redford, the attorney my friend Ari had recommended. He wasn't flashy or corporate. He worked from a quiet office above a second-hand bookstore, wore knit sweaters instead of suits, and greeted me with a handshake and a cup of lemon tea. But the moment I laid out my story, he didn't blink. He leaned forward, fingers steepled, and said something that stuck. This isn't about money, Lila. Not really. It's about control. And they just lost it. He advised me to prepare for escalation. Paper trails. Surveillance footage if I could get it. He even gave me a list of private investigators, just in case. I left his office more grounded, but no less uneasy. Because the truth is, I didn't want to become this. Paranoid. Guarded. I didn't want to spend my first real chance at freedom building walls instead of a life. But I had no choice. I spent the next 3 days reinforcing everything. Changed the locks. Installed a camera above my mailbox. Set up 2-factor authentication on every account I had. I even opened a new bank account at an entirely different branch under my middle name. It wasn't fear. It was foresight. Because my gut told me this wasn't over. And I was right. Late Thursday afternoon, as the sky turned that soft, fading gold, I got an email. From Daisy. Subject line, we need to talk. No body. No salutation. Just an attachment. A PDF. A document. I opened it with trembling fingers. It was a legal filing, not from her, but from a law firm I didn't recognize. A petition for compensation. They were suing me. Daisy. My mother. My father. All 3 listed as co-petitioners. They claimed I had verbally promised to split the winnings. That I had benefited from years of emotional and financial support. That we were a unified family unit, and I was breaching an understood agreement. The arrogance. The audacity. I stood up so fast I knocked over the chair. My ears were ringing. My hands shook. I'd prepared for many things, but seeing my name in black and white as the defendant did something to me. It broke something. Not my resolve. No, that only sharpened. What broke was the last, faint thread of hope that there was any love left between us. I called Redford immediately. He didn't sound surprised. Just tired. They're going for the emotional route, he said. They want to pressure you into settling before it gets to court. We won't let it. That night, I started gathering every piece of evidence I had. Emails, voicemails, screenshots of texts, journal entries from college, detailing every time they asked for money, ignored me, guilt me. Bank statements from when I sent them grocery money even though I was living off ramen. Photos of the bruises on my arms from long shifts. Therapy logs. I called Uncle Mike, my father's estranged brother, who had long since distanced himself from the family. He listened quietly. And then he said, I always knew they'd eat their own someday. Tell your lawyer I have the receipts. And he did. Old emails. Screenshots. Even voice memos from family dinners, saved on some dusty hard drive. One of them? My mother, laughing, saying, Lila's our safety net. She's too soft to say no. I cried when I heard it. Not because it hurt, but because it was proof. The weekend before the hearing, I went to the bank. I retrieved the real check, still sealed, still pristine, and held it in my hands one last time before depositing it into the trust Redford had helped me set up. Then I shredded the envelope it came in. Because that chapter was done. They thought the money made me valuable. But it was the choices I made afterward that made me powerful. Let them come. Let them lie, twist, plead. I was no longer the daughter who stayed quiet. I was the woman they underestimated. And I had every intention of showing them what a mistake that was. The courthouse looked smaller than I imagined, not the looming monolith of justice I'd pictured in my head, but a squat gray building that smelled faintly of floor polish and bureaucracy. The waiting area outside the courtroom was strangely quiet, a padded bench against a pale yellow wall, humming fluorescent lights overhead, and the faint rustle of papers behind a receptionist's window. It should have been ordinary, mundane, but it felt like a battlefield in disguise. I sat there with Redford, his legs crossed, reading through the case file again like he hadn't already memorized it. He wasn't a man of dramatics. He didn't speak unless he had something necessary to say, and when he did speak, it was with the calm precision of someone who had already seen how the story ended. I envied that kind of clarity, because I was anything but calm. My hands were cold. My back was stiff from sitting too straight. I had ironed my shirt 3 times that morning, triple-checked the folder in my bag, made sure my phone was off, and rehearsed every possible thing I might be asked to say in my head. But still, I felt like I was 10 years old again, standing in the kitchen while Daisy cried over broken dishes she'd knocked over, and somehow, I was the one who got blamed. Only now, the stakes were higher. Now, it wasn't just about who was lying. It was about who got to rewrite the truth. Redford glanced at the clock. They're late, he said casually. I didn't ask who. I knew who. And right on cue, the door creaked open. Judith entered first, draped in a beige trench coat, her hair pinned in its usual too-tight twist, face set in the kind of neutral expression that screamed false civility. Raymond followed, shoulders hunched, eyes scanning the room like he didn't want to be seen here. Then came Daisy. Of course, she wore white. A pristine, pearl-white blouse, pale pink lipstick, her makeup carefully calculated to make her look soft, vulnerable. Her heels clicked across the tile like a metronome of entitlement. She didn't look at me. None of them did. But I saw the sideways glance Daisy gave my lawyer. Appraising. Cold. Let's go, Redford said quietly, standing. Inside, the courtroom was simple. No dramatic gallery, no jury box. Just a judge, a court reporter, and the 2 legal teams. The judge, a woman with graying hair and a face carved from stone, adjusted her glasses and called the room to order. Introductions were made. The case began. Their lawyer, a tall man with an expensive haircut and an unfortunate tan, launched into his speech first. He talked about family values, about shared history, about the emotional contracts that exist between relatives, how we invest in one another, how verbal agreements matter. He painted me as someone who had risen quickly and left the people who built her behind. I stared at him as he spoke, wondering if he believed a single word he was saying. Or if he, too, had seen the videos, the texts, the receipts, and simply didn't care. Then Daisy took the stand. Her voice quivered. Her hands shook just enough to be noticed. She spoke about our childhood like it was a pastel painting. How we played dress-up. How I helped her with homework. How I once told her, years ago, that if I ever came into money, I'd take care of her. She smiled softly. She used to say we were a team, she added, eyes glassy. Redford didn't flinch. When it was our turn, he stood slowly, straightened his notes, and asked, "Do you recall this video, Ms. Rosewood?" He hit play on a screen wheeled in for evidence. It was Daisy. Her voice was unmistakable, laughing on a recorded call with a friend. "Oh please, I know how to work Lila. She's weak. Give her the guilt eyes, she folds. Every time." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Judith's eyes widened. Raymond went still. The judge leaned forward, one eyebrow raised. "Ms. Rosewood," Redford asked again, voice still polite, "were you manipulating your sister into giving you a portion of her winnings?" Daisy stammered. Denied. Said it was a joke. Out of context. But it was too late. The mask was off. Next, Judith took the stand. She tried a different tactic, dignity. She spoke of motherhood, of sacrifice. She said I was always different, always distant. That they gave what they could. That maybe mistakes were made, but they only wanted what was fair. Redford responded by showing the judge email printouts. Ones where Judith wrote to her sister things like, "Lila's strong. She doesn't need us. Daisy needs help." Then came Raymond. His testimony was brief. He mostly mumbled. He admitted to checking my mailbox out of curiosity. Claimed he didn't open anything. Redford presented security footage. Timestamped. Clear. Finally, it was my turn. I didn't have a speech prepared. I didn't want one. I sat in that chair and told the truth. I told them how I worked since I was 15. How I paid my way through school. How I didn't have health insurance for 3 years. How I skipped meals to afford textbooks. I described what it felt like to be invisible in my own house, to watch as everything was handed to Daisy. Not because she needed it, but because they simply decided she was worth more. I told them that when I won, I didn't scream, didn't throw a party. I just felt relief. Like maybe, finally, I could breathe. And then I told them about the theft. About the forced mailbox. The missing document. The video Daisy posted. The messages, the threats, the final dinner where I was handed an ultimatum wrapped in mashed potatoes and false smiles. "This isn't about money," I said, echoing Redford's words. "It's about finally being allowed to say no." When I was finished, the judge didn't speak right away. She sat back, tapping her pen against the wood. The room was utterly silent. And then she said, "Thank you. I've heard enough." I walked back to my seat. I didn't look at Daisy. I didn't need to. Because for the first time, she was the one being ignored. The courtroom emptied slowly, like a tide pulling back after a storm. Daisy was the first to rise, her chair screeching against the floor, followed by Judith, her jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might shatter. Raymond shuffled behind them, silent, always a half step out of rhythm, as though the gravity of the verdict hadn't quite reached him yet, or maybe he was still pretending it didn't matter. I stayed seated. Redford didn't say anything right away. He just packed the papers back into his leather case with the same quiet efficiency he'd brought to every step of this case. No theatrics. No gloating. Just finality. The sound of the zipper closing echoed louder than it should have. "Let's give them a few minutes to clear the hallway," he said softly, not looking at me. I nodded. I didn't want to see them either. Not yet. I stared down at my hands in my lap. They weren't shaking anymore. When we did finally step out into the corridor, it was blessedly empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Somewhere, a copier churned to life. Outside the glass doors at the end of the hall, I could see the faint blur of reporters, some still lingering like vultures, hoping for one last dramatic quote. I wasn't going to give them one. Not today. Redford offered to escort me to my car, but I shook my head. I needed space. I needed the walk. I stepped outside into the cold air, wrapped my coat tighter around me, and started down the sidewalk, blending into the hum of the city like just another face in the crowd. The wind was sharp, the sky silver with clouds, and everything felt washed clean. That night, I turned off my phone. Completely. No calls, no texts, no buzzing interruptions. I lit a candle on the kitchen counter, poured a glass of wine, and sat in silence. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I just breathed. But the silence didn't last. 2 days later, the mail came. Not email. Not a certified letter. Just a plain white envelope with no return address, delivered by hand to my building. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No apology. No explanation. Just a note. You think you've won, but this isn't over. Jay. I stared at it for a long time, the ink slightly smeared in one corner. The way that J curled at the end made it unmistakable. Judith. Still clinging to the fantasy that I was something she could control, intimidate, or threaten back into obedience. But there was nothing left to threaten. I handed the note to Redford. He filed it away without a word. That was the end of the courtroom battle, but not the end of their tantrums. Over the next few weeks, Daisy tried a last-ditch social media campaign. A weepy live stream where she said I ripped our family apart and hinted that she might have to start a GoFundMe for her emotional damages. It got some traction. Then it got torn apart. Comments flooded in. People weren't falling for it this time. Her followers had seen too much. The court records were public now, and someone had even uploaded the testimony clips. Her fake crying couldn't compete with the cold, hard facts. The tide had turned. Judith, from what I heard through an old neighbor, had stopped attending her book club and church functions. Too many whispers. Too many people asking questions she didn't want to answer. And Raymond? He just disappeared into the background again. Maybe that's where he always belonged. But I didn't disappear. I started rebuilding. Not just my finances, which were now handled by a wealth advisor Redford recommended. A brilliant woman named Marcy who didn't blink when I said I wanted 80% of the money put in long-term investments and untouchable trusts. No, I meant rebuilding my life. I found a new apartment. Nothing flashy, but it had huge windows and a little balcony where I could drink my coffee in the morning and pretend the city was mine alone. I adopted a dog, a quiet rescue named Leo with big eyes and a gentle soul. I bought new sheets. I donated every old sweater Daisy had ever borrowed. I planted herbs in mason jars. And slowly, the noise in my head began to fade. But the best part? One evening, as the sky turned orange and the first chill of fall rolled in, I opened a blank notebook. On the first page, I wrote a sentence that had been echoing in my bones since the verdict. This story begins with a lie, but it ends with freedom. I began to write. Not for vengeance. Not for justice. Just for me. I wrote the truth of it all. The feeling of being unseen. The pain of being used. The shock of finding power in silence, and even more in saying no. I wrote the fire and the fear. The courtroom. The cold stares. The freedom of walking away. And one day, when I'm ready, I might let the world read it. But for now, I'm just living. Finally. And I don't need a lottery ticket to know that I've already won.